this video is going to have a look at a concept that many people think they understand really well, but in reality they actually don't really understand, because often biodiversity gets mistaken for sort of nature, natural, and these sorts of things, walking through fields and very scenic scenes, anything but being in a city, right? So people often sort of misinterpret what this means and they think they understand it. However, the key word here is about diversity, and we're going to have a look at what that means. So I've got two images here. This here is a vineyard, all right? This is New York City. Now, if I were to ask 99% of people, they would say that this is the more biodiverse environment. This is the more biodiverse ecosystem. Obviously, we think of New York City as this big bustling place where you just get humans marching around at all times of the day. And this is this lovely, serene place in the middle of the countryside. And it's lovely for these sort of afternoon walks. The reality is, though, New York City is actually a more biodiverse area or ecosystem than this vineyard. And there's a very, very good reason why. So there are two measures. When you talk about biodiversity, you are talking about the variety. So that's the different species that occupy that ecosystem, and the abundance of those species. So let's have a look at these two things in the previous two images. If we have a look at the vineyard is one, maybe two different varieties of grape, and that will make up 99% of the biodiversity there. Now, when we talk about biodiversity, when we talk about sort of abundance, we talk about biomass. So, for example, 1,000 ants might be, the equivalent of a rabbit in terms of sort of the biodiversity, just because of the mass that they have. So the majority of the mass here is wine, it's grapes. Now, you might get a couple of humans, you might get a couple of sort of small mammals, you might get some insects and mollusks and worms, those sorts of things. You might even get some weeds, but the very, very vast majority of this ecosystem is going to be grapes. In New York, however, you've got a much greater biodiversity, because yes, the majority of it will be humans and rats and pigeons, but you have lots of different species of trees, you have pets, you have all sorts of things within this environment. So you have a large number of different species, so you have a large variety, but also the abundance isn't actually that it isn't all sort of monoculture, it isn't all just humans. There are other things that dominate that sort of the biomass of that ecosystem. So let's have a look at a few theoretical examples. I've got three ecosystems here, and I've got ecosystem 1 that has 5 species, all of which have an equal share of the biodiversity, or equal share of the biomass. Ecosystem 2, 20 different species, 80% of those species is just one species. 80% of the biomass is just one species. Ecosystem 3, somewhere in between, 10 different species, 2 of which account for 30% each, so 60% belongs to 2 different species. The other 8 is split between the other 40%, so each of the other 8 species have about 5% of the biomass each. Which one do you think is the most biodiverse there? Now, that's very, very difficult to actually judge. So this one's got, ecosystem 2 has a lot of variety, but not very much variety and abundance. Ecosystem 1, not a great variety of actual species, but it's quite an even abundance throughout the ecosystem of each. And ecosystem 2, somewhere in between, it's got reasonable variety of species, it's also got a reasonable spread of that biomass. So there isn't actually a correct answer to this, right? And there is one, but that comes up in the A level where you have to calculate biodiversity. But at GCSE, what's really important is you consider both of these factors, the number of different species and the biomass that those species contribute to.